The transfer portal has absolutely changed college football forever. And it seems as if the sport has leaned into it as they free up more rules and how often a player can move from school to school with no waiting on their eligibility or time to play. And it's the biggest cause and effect from NIL, whether you disagree or agree to the idea of NIL and implementing it into the sport. That's not the point of this video. The point truly is the duology of two programs who have very polar opposite views of the transfer portal, though they're very different situations and the pros and cons. And realistically, the fact that I think they're both wrong in the way that they look at the portal as we get into the next season, I think it's the great college football experiment. It's not a social experiment, but like in roster construction and the idea behind it, I think is fascinating because it's not like the NFL or really in any other sport. Even you could even do like other college sports, like in basketball, you only have a set amount of people that can be on a roster. So yeah, you have the frequency, but you have a large amount of teams. When we're talking about football, we're talking about a 52-man roster here that so many people can fluctuate in and out of the roster just from the transfer portal alone when you have the fall timelines and then you have the spring ones as well. So let's talk about Colorado, and then we'll also talk about Clemson, because when we're talking about the two distinct differences between the two programs is the transfer portal. Now, obviously, the situations are different. When we're talking about Clemson, we're talking about national title winning programs. In the past decade, that has happened. And you have Dabo Swinney, a national championship winning head coach, a former dynasty, if we're being honest here, that has seen itself fall to the wayside of not mediocrity, but just being above average. But when you know that they can hit the mountaintop and stay there, that becomes the expectation. And that's what makes a team like Alabama so incredibly, I would say, impressive for them to be able to, from 2009 all the way to 2023, be consistently at the top of the mountain. And the expectation is for them to win a national title and not always meet it, but always be in the conversation is what makes it so impressive. When we're talking about Clemson, they have taken just a step down, a tier down to now what was seen as a force in the ACC is finally getting pushed back by other teams. And now they're just seen as a team that potentially could be fighting for an ACC title. And they have all the talent in the world. But their head coach, as the sport has evolved and changed around them and how talent is acquired, he has not adjusted. And that is seen as the correlation of why they have fallen off. And Clemson is starting to look at it as we can only build homegrown talent through recruiting, the traditional way. And many people feel that that is what is holding them back from continuously keeping the momentum that was seen in the 2010s of them continuously being in national titles and competing and winning them to now just barely being on the cusp of making the playoff or even the AC title itself. They had a terrible season last year in their standards. Now, to a lot of other teams, they would have loved to have the amount of wins that they did. They would love to have the amount of talent on that roster. But the problem is they are just sticking with what they are able to get in the recruiting cycles and not supplementing the deficiencies that they have had, especially at the wide receiver position. Then we go to Colorado. Colorado feels that they can build an entire program through the transfer portal, something that we have never seen before, mainly because we've never seen the transfer portal used in the way that we've seen it today. I mean, truly a completely different situation from Clemson. We're talking about a program that was dead in the water, a former national title winning program back in the 90s, but now they were dead. I mean, they were seen as one of the worst programs, if not the worst Division I program in the Power Five, and they weren't going anywhere. You bring in Deion Sanders, you bring in Shedeur Sanders, you bring in Travis Hunter, a massive boost of talent from where they previous were, and you are going with unorthodox ways of acquiring talent. I mean, just basically flipping an entire roster in one season. And look, you go on a heater to start September and October, incredibly. I mean, I cannot remember a time where the hype was that big for a college team since 2019 LSU. It was going through the roof. And of course, at least I had predicted that the offensive line and the defensive line was not going to be able to stack up in a loaded Pac-12. It just so happens the Pac-12 was loaded in their final season. God rest its soul. And so the expectation is, as they go into the Big 12, is, well, how can you take the next step? It was incredible what they were able to pull off last season. I think they quadrupled their wins from the previous year. And Deion has been very outspoken in his technique and his ideology of the transfer portal. It shows in recruiting. Obviously, you get a guy like Jordan Seaton, who was a top offensive tackle out of high school, but that is one player. That is one guy. And you start to look at the roster as more guys start transferring out and the rotation begins of, we're bringing a lot of people in, but we're also giving up a lot of guys. And I know he said in a press conference that the people that are judging the guys that are transferring out, that we aren't at practice. We don't know these guys. And you know what? It is his football team. I give him the respect. I give him the trust in that. But also on the flip side is it not concerning that you are not really building a foundation through high school? Let's not ignore the traditional way of building a program. And on the flip side, when we talk about Clemson, let's not ignore the extra frosting on the cake, the way to put you over the top, the in-season trade to go all in for a championship. I mean, just think about what Clemson could have been if they were to acquire like a Keon Coleman at wide receiver, something, that position group that they've been desperately needing some juice in now. Obviously, I feel that they feel like they have that in Bryant Westco this offseason, but honestly, they could have supplemented so many other positions to be back into contention for multiple years if they just accepted the transfer portal. And this is my point. And when I say that both teams, I think, are in the wrong, this is why I feel when you're on one side of the spectrum and then the other, and you're polar opposites at this point, when you have one team that is trying to completely ignore a way to acquire talent, and then on the flip side, you have the same ideology, but just flip it from the transfer portal to high school recruiting. And I understand from Deion's perspective, if he feels that he can get guys from the transfer portal, he believes he wants proven grown men, guys that have actually played football at the collegiate level, and that he could build a culture. But and he may disagree with this, I fully understand it, but you just can't build a program through transfer portals. It is just not possible. You have to get some homegrown talent. You have to develop, because if this does not work out at Colorado, if they're not contending for the Big 12 this upcoming season, people are going to start asking the question of, what is Deion Sanders as a head coach? In all honesty, I'm giving him grace for some of the decisions he made throughout last season. There were some questionable decisions, but what is his specialty as a head coach? Is it recruiting? Because is it just recruiting in the transfer portal? Because right now he's been able to get top tier talent, but you have to get depth. You have to get size. You have to be able to play at the line of scrimmage. And that's not to say he can't do it, but he hasn't shown it up to this point. And he's a young coach, guys. I'm trying to give him grace, but the name of Deion Sanders, if you want to talk like you are a big name, you are one of the upper echelon head coaches, you got to start doing what these upper echelon guys do, in all honesty, and that is recruiting at the high school level. And Dabo Swinney, let's talk about Dabo, national title winning head coach. You got to adapt. Coming from someone who supports that program and has dealt with a guy like Jimbo Fisher and has all the resources and the infrastructure to win a national title, you have to adapt. It's what made Nick Saban incredible. The fact that he went from a power running offense through defense, always going to be able to recruit at a high level. He got pushed out by the transfer portal. And it's not the whole reason, but I think it's going to push Dabo if he does not adjust. If he wants to be the head coach at Clemson and compete for national titles, they have to use the transfer portal. And them both theories and ideologies of building a program, I think, are wrong. One's too modern, one's too lenient on the transfer portal, and the other one is too traditional, and I'm worried it's going to be the downfall of both of these programs. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've seen me before, welcome back. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Leave a comment, leave a like, do something for the algorithm one time. It takes like half a second, and it really shows support for the channel. Honestly, I always have preference for you to leave a comment because I like responding to them. So thank you so much for having me, and have a fantastic day.